How's it going, John? Thank you for taking a little time to speak with me. If you want to just take this opportunity to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is John Sistrunk. I've been all over the board on topics involving meditation, consciousness, energy, dimension. I am third degree Reiki attuned, have been for about a decade. I've been involved in different schools of thought, including Higher Balance Institute and their hyperdimensional consciousness knowledge. Also, Dr. Stephen Greer's C-SETI program involving the extraterrestrial topics and actually making contact, in which we were filmed in Sirius, the documentary. They show footage from some of that contact. Very exciting stuff. I've been involved also with a school of thought called Transforming Cellular Memory, led by Don Hansen and his wife Jennifer Hansen. And through all of these different modalities, including also medical Qi Gong, which I've recently gotten into, being Matt Evans being my primary instructor in that. All these modalities have kind of been brought together and distilled to create my current, if you will, perception and flow concerning spirit, energy, levels of consciousness, and evolving the self as well as the collective whole.
Great. So what would you say your greatest offering to this unfolding of awareness that's occurring on our globe right now? What is your greatest function or service in that?
It's probably my passion to help others recognize the prisons that they have put on themselves and or allowed others to put on them, and to break free of them, and to recognize their own inner functions, their inner workings, their energy, their unconscious aspects, and to use their conscious recognition of these things to heal and evolve themselves and the relationships and collective abroad.
Great. So with the understanding that all manifesting phenomena ultimately spawns from one source, one creative nexus, what is your perspective of the energy dynamics that precede manifesting phenomena in the universe?
Well, you have this one energy, and this energy precedes dimension. It is the creator of all dimension. And when I say dimension, to me, every dimension is a reference for perceived experience. In other words, not just height, width, depth, and flow through time as we perceive it. Also, color, the different characteristics of color. Sound, the different characteristics of that. Magnetism, gravity, all these things are different dimensions of experience. And this one consciousness has created these dimensions of perspective practically by looking for them, if you will, in order to understand itself and to experience itself. And it has created, if you will, different varying levels of consciousness. Everything from the pure consciousness that it is, which would be what some might call the divine I am presence, which is beyond identity. It just is. And that's something that people work towards when they're working on releasing the ego, is re-merging with that, and then being able to integrate it back in with the other ego programs and whatnot, and still being in proper flow of surrender. And then you have the so-called archetype consciousnesses, be the gods that people worship, angels, planetary collectives, solar system collectives, galactic collective interplays of consciousness, and then down to human and plant, animal, bacteria. And all of these are microscopic and macroscopic reflections of each other. And it's kind of interesting that all of these different ego programs, if you will, from human-based to so-called archetypal-based, can very easily fall into a sense of self-service. You've seen in many religions how gods want sacrifices to them, and they're very adamant that you worship me and no one else. Well, this is it's sort of an egocentrism by those levels of consciousness that want to propagate themselves and try to hold on to their identity, whereas the ones who are moving towards full divinity realize that even those identities are in a state of an illusion. And the ones that have embraced that, those greater archetypical consciousness that have embraced the truth that at their essence they are even beyond that, and that they can release themselves and adapt just like people have to, those are the ones that are more in flow with service to that which is the prime aspect. Now, you could also look at how consciousness plays out elementally. It started off probably very simple, at least on this material realm. And the energy shows itself through gravitation and magnetism. And I'm referring to M.T. Keshe's theory from the Keshe Foundation on when he talks about gravity, it's the pulling in, and when he talks about magnetism, it's the pushing out. And on a material level, where consciousness is attempting to separate itself out in a way, perceptively, and observe itself through itself, it needs ideas of location and personal boundaries of these different facets of itself. And so, like with a planet, you have a gravitational field that pulls itself in, pulls energy in, processes it in its center, and that's its center of being and experience. And it also has the magnetic field, which is its aura or its personal space. This is my space of domain, my main space of my influence. And it's interesting that the magnetic field of the Earth is involved with shielding us from outside influences, including cosmic radiation, solar radiation, and these sorts of things.
Can you talk a little bit about, so the Institute at Stanford HeartMath has mapped the auric field of the heart space, and they find that it is a perfect toroid shape. As well, the magnetosphere of the Earth has been plotted in the exact same shape. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what benefit that serves in observing these fundamental schematics that pervade the universe? What benefit would that serve?
Well, one of my favorites is to observe the toroid, specifically of the human being. If you've noticed, a lot of spiritual people talk about the importance of the crown chakra and the soul star and having energy coming in from there and dominating. However, in reality, if you looked at the primal energy of spirit that has segregated itself into these different expressions, it always flows from the bottom up. It's beyond identity. It begins to work itself out in experiences. It begins to self-organize. And then it begins to self-reflect and create greater levels of awareness. Well, I won't say greater, but different levels of awareness and understanding and the ability to interact. As you move up through the different intelligences of the human body, they all relate to different aspects of personal intelligence, and then gets up into the aspect of ego and self-identity. You get to the crown area, and it starts to bridge into macro identities, if you will, your soul, oversouls, and so forth. Now, the interesting thing is once it goes so far up, it circles back around. So there comes a point once again where the ego part of the self, even the soul part of the self, reflects to a point where it releases the attachment to its own identity, and once again it's just pure beingness and energy coming back under. This is important because when you see these fields and how they interplay, it's kind of like a reflection back on the process of, anytime you observe these patterns regularly throughout a universe, you can see it's a reminder back to the self on how to understand our own inner workings. And you can learn to perceive these energetic dynamics within the self and these other fields. We also can observe how our own toroidal field, if you will, our own consciousness, being connected to that of the planet, how the dynamics interplay, how our collective influence individually building up can alter, if you will, certain aspects of the function of the planet. People talk about how in the past it was much easier, or there were many more reports of so-called miracles. And to me, miracles are just something that you haven't learned to explain. When someone becomes conscious enough of energy and their will is able to properly convince reality around them to follow a pattern, it can do things that we would consider miracles, and to them it just is. Well, it was probably easier to step outside the bounds of normal reality back then because you had less people, you had less fixed ideas about what should be, and so even the set laws of physics that were accepted, there was a sense of mysticism and the unknown, which on a quantum level gave us variability, okay, to what could happen in the world. Now, when you understand this, you can also start to gather the understanding that if enough people shift in their perspective, their perception of the world, which starts with their perception of themselves and their relationship to themselves and others, when that happens, it starts to ripple out and affect the world as a whole on that subconscious level. You're aware of, what do they call them? What was the experiment done where random number generators for world events?
Right.
You're aware of those experiments? For those who are not aware, I suggest looking it up and checking it out. And also the experiments done by transcendental meditation practitioners in the Middle East, and how their transcendental meditation practices actually, on a consistent, measurable rate, put an end to a very significant level of violence for the period of time that they were doing it. Now, why did it come back? Well, there are other variables involved in that, and that's a long topic in and of itself. Does this kind of help answer what you were looking for with that?
Absolutely.
The field questions?
Definitely. I want to talk a little bit about within the toroid itself. A lot of Eastern traditions, as well as Western theistic traditions, place specific emphasis on the singularity, the point at which all expansion arises from and which all contraction goes back to. Mm-hmm. In the human body, that would be plotted within the heart space. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the heart space and specifically its significance in the shifting of awareness that's occurring on planet right now? What benefit might somebody have within heart awareness as opposed to mind awareness or brain awareness?
This is a complex question, and the reason being is because a lot of people, when they hear about the importance of the heart intelligence, they haven't quite also understood the importance of okay, have you heard the concept of the inner heart? Okay. There are kind of two aspects to the heart intelligence. The heart, much like the brain or the mind, can become very addicted to its attachments and its patterns. When this happens and strong emotional patterns built up, the heart intelligence is just as automated as the mind, and this is a part of what keeps the field stuck, if you will, in certain patterns. However, when a person uses pure presence, which is actually more so associated with the body and the instinctive intelligence, and can look at the Kundalini idea, it always rises from the bottom. Again, pure spirit, that which is in pure presence and beyond intellectual ego-based identity, flows up. And the idea in Kundalini is that as this energy flows up, it purifies these different centers, right? So the more you can meditate on being in that space of pure presence and isness in the body, and you can learn to observe these emotions unbiasedly and to release that, the more it opens up, if you will, the inner heart. Now, the inner heart, when not attached to emotion, is that point, if you will, where the perfect masculine and feminine dance happens. And it's at a space which is not identified with either, and yet is a perfect dance with both. And as far as it being located, remember, everything involving time and space that we perceive is more so an excuse for consciousness to explain itself to itself. So I would try to put it more from a psychological standpoint. The heart space, when you've let go of all attachment, is that space where you can find that dance between the individual beingness and the connection with the whole. This is that part where the magnetic field is strongest. I like Nassim Haramein and how he discusses the possibility of there being that singularity, or that, if you will, kind of mini black hole or whatever within the heart space, because of the particular electromagnetic dynamics that are there. And a singularity is the place in which all dimension converges and you slip past dimension itself back to the source. And it does appear that the heart is that place. So it's a challenging thing to describe how it works. What I will say is that from my experience, when a person can get fully in the embodiment of the moment and out of their heads and out of the addictions that the ego-based heart often looks for, and they can get into pure presence, there's this intelligence that arises that can move into those field dynamics and can see itself as a part of this whole. This is where true love arises, if you will. True compassion. The ability to understand and to actually tangibly feel, not just think and say, oh, well, we're obviously all one, but to feel it. And when you feel and experience that, that's when it's most effective. And that's also when your relationship dynamics take on a relationship with yourself, with this divine field, and other aspects of it being you, my environment. That's when it takes on a much more interactive dynamic. This heart space, because it is the source at the culmination center point of that field, which is connected with every other field in the universe ultimately. When you get in there and you let go of your human-based thinking and allow this intelligence to open up and to awaken, that's when you learn to communicate with the field in its most subtle and transcendent manner. Which also means you have to be just as open to communicating back. So it's not a dominance play at all. This isn't one of these things where it's like, oh, I now have great power and can dominate reality. No, it's a relationship. It's a dance. It's a lover's communion, if you will. And you can only know that through that heart space.
I want to take this a little bit to the macrocosmic and talk a little bit about the collective in this specific period in time. You were talking earlier about certain adept individuals affecting their environment around them in a positive way, be it a transcendental practitioner, a Qi Gong practitioner, whatever it may be. Can you talk a little bit about the physics of the fact that we are creating reality based on mutual agreements as humans, so that reality is a culmination of agreements that we as humans have set forth? What do you see unfolding as far as our collective agreements shifting in the very near future?
Well, all right, I'm just going to take this from the more obvious, and then we'll move into the more, what I consider somewhat, for a lot of people, uncomfortable aspects. The more obvious and comfortable aspects, at least from my experience, are like looking at quantum physics. People are now starting to realize that when you get into the realms of physics, where the laws are not already largely accepted, things get very quirky. nothing tends to work out the way you should expect or for an extended period of time. The different observer can affect the experiment in different ways by what they expect to see. And so the more we're diving into it, for those who are able to pay attention, we're starting to realize that when you get to these levels, once again, where there's not already a collective agreement on what should be happening, it can vary up so easily. It's the same thing with not having as many people holding a fixed reality and stay on the planet, and so these self-aware individuals, these energetically aware individuals, were able to more easily create magic, if you will. And to me, magic is simply consciousness that has become aware of a pattern and decides to move outside the pattern and do something different. That, to me, is magic. And it can be as simple as altering the flow of a relationship, where you suddenly become conscious of a looping dynamic and you say, we're going to change this for the better, and you do. That's, to me, a form of magic. So when I say magic, I mean that. And quantum physics, those levels are very magical in a sense, because they don't have a set pattern. The mathematics are constantly having to be re-revised, rewritten, reconsidered, because everything keeps going kind of quirky. The mainstream doesn't like talking about it. There are a lot of people who stubbornly do everything they can to ignore it and try to rationalize their way out of it. It's there all the time. As this is happening, we have to start, and we also are experimenting with things like the Heart Math Institute, how the heart field and the feelings you hold within your being are altering, if you will, the dominoes or the dice rolls around us. And the more people that are in line with things turning out a certain way, the more the dominoes are lined up for that event. And we're also discovering that the heart seems to know things before the brain does, through the randomly generated computer images and how the heart reacts before the brain can recognize what's going to come up, and it even does so before the picture comes up. Again, this is for people to check out on their own. These are all things that are going to start tearing down barriers of elitism when it comes to religions and scientific religions, or dogmas, if you will. Dogma is dogma, whether it's in a religion or a scientific community. I know plenty of scientists that are atheists, and they're some of the most religious people I've ever seen. And they don't like hearing that. It's a fact. Dogma is dogma. And you can always tell because of how defensive they get and how angry they get. Now that is the more broad scope level. As people not only recognize this, but the recognition of these things begin to cause them to do practices which open up their perception of these realities. That's the biggest key, is that they begin to experience these things tactily. It becomes a part of their sensory experience. As that happens, their lives will change, and by leading by example alone, other people will begin to change as well, and that's a part of this awakening. Now, the more uncomfortable parts, which is what people have to be willing to dive into in order to have the most dramatic changes, involve understanding that everything we see outside of ourselves, everything that creates any kind of an emotional response in us, a notable emotional response, and especially if it's something that we're repeatedly perceiving, it is pointing out something in us, even if it's a minute sliver of it, and even if it expresses itself in a totally different way, it's pointing out something in us that we need to reflect upon and we need to transmute within ourselves. And as we do, it will assist in transmuting the collective whole. And I, again, through about a decade of practice and observation, have seen this in my life over and over and over again. And others I worked with have seen it over and over again. And other people who worked with me, they demonstrated it, which helped me want to practice it. And something that makes people very uncomfortable. Let's take a simple topic. The idea of not liking authority figures having too much control over us. Okay? First off, I want to premise also by saying that in the dance between individual will and the collective whole, there are very simple rules. One is to always be aware and ultimately surrendered to the greater good through the divine movement. And within that, dancing your own individual choice. That's what tends to create the best results. And that takes time to reflect and be aware of the feelings of that greater, if you will, spirit, energy, whatever, and learning to navigate that. That takes practice often for people to reopen. Some people just do it naturally. They didn't lose it when they were a child or whatever. The second is, again, do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. In other words, and the idea is simply this: respect other people's free will, as long as they are not causing harm to another, as long as they are not attempting to dominate another. And if you should choose to do something selfishly concerning another person or people, you will reap the reward. You will reap that back unto yourself. It will happen. It may happen immediately. It may take time. It will happen. And the whole idea is to be... the reason this happens is because we are ultimately one, and therefore it has to work out that way. Okay? So those are some important things to keep in mind. And ultimately, this whole thing about fear and love plays in, because when you fear always works in alignment with the personalized ego, and it always ultimately distorts things to a point to where you will cross over to that side of needing to dominate and control because you're afraid all the time, and it creates all kinds of problems. And then there's love, self-love, which is very important, self-trust, and then love for the whole and the rights for the whole. Okay, I wanted to preface with that for people to reflect on, because when they start looking at these other things I'm going to mention, it's going to start to bring up within them, well, what is motivating me? Why am I the way I am? And this stuff that's bothering me out there, is it showing me a fear-based program within myself that needs to be changed? Or this stuff that I think is so amazing out here and beautiful? And is it reflecting back something within me that I need to appreciate about myself? That's based in love, and I need to nurture. And so, okay, now, the idea of authority figures having tyranny over others. A lot of people getting pissed about it, and rightfully so. Now, from a love-based standpoint, we love ourselves. We feel we should have a right to experience life, make mistakes, learn from them, and move on. However, you have these elitist groups in the world who are afraid of people having free will. They're afraid of losing their place of power. Why? Because they're afraid. They're just full of fear. They've been raised that way generation after generation after generation. Now, a love-based response to that is, okay, these people are delusional. They're an illusion. And this needs to change. Me make it very clear, we don't accept being anyone's slaves. We have every right to be free-willed individuals. Our standpoint is in love. We have the greatest good of the whole in our hearts, in our beings. That's what we wish to experience. And so from there, we'll move forward and help them understand that's the best way to do it. And yeah, it may be challenging. And there may be some extreme things that have to happen for that to work out. That's not for me to decide. You know, I go with where the energy goes. My intention is set, and then how it unfolds, it unfolds. Now, the fear-based response is, oh my God, what are they doing? We need to freak out, and we need to take them all out, and we need to, rise up in arms, and all this kind of stuff. And you can always tell it's the energy. What's the energy of the person who's involved in this? Now, a lot of these people who are in a fear-based mode concerning this, they're not realizing that there's something inside of them that is of the same quality as what created that dysfunction. And people say, oh, I'm not like that. I wouldn't do that to anyone. I would not impede upon their freedoms. Really? Let me ask you a question. In your intimate relationships, are you pretty rigid about how you want your lover to be? Are you in love with them totally for who and what they are? Or is there any part of you that likes to be controlling? And is there any part of you that's afraid of them, of their own free will, doing what they want, even if it means ultimately moving on from you? And so are you always out of fear doing things to try to keep that from happening? Are you always clinging to them? Are you always needing them? And on some level, maybe even being manipulative in order to make that happen? You say that's not the same. I say BS. It's the exact same element, the exact same frequency. It's just played out differently to different levels depending on how much it's taking you over. Now, you may still love them. It may still be a good relationship in the sense that there is love there. How much of it is in love and how much fear is polluting it? With your children, are you willing to express trust that they have the ability to make mistakes and learn? When you do teach them, do you do so from a respectful standpoint and the understanding that they ultimately need to get out in the world and do their own thing? Maybe even at a young age need to have the right to make certain decisions and to observe, and so you speak to them like an adult. You teach them in a way that is present, not this because I said so, but you actually learn to make sense to your kids and respect their ability to reflect. Or are you one of these people that feels the need to dominate them? Oh, they can't have any sense. I must control. And you're afraid, and so you're promoting your fear on them and actually causing them all kinds of dysfunctionality, ultimately. They don't learn to make the decisions for themselves. They learn to always need an authority figure to tell them what to do. Or maybe they become rebellious, and in that rebellion, all that pressure is built up and they make stupid mistakes because they felt like they needed to break free.
Definitely. So in my own experiences with transmuting certain aspects, perhaps less preferable aspects of myself, I've noticed that when I go into higher states of awareness via meditation, yoga, etc., I notice that when I face these aspects of myself, it's almost like it's the last thing I want to do. It's the last thing that I really want to take part in. But once it's transmuted, it's the only thing I want to do. And so can you speak to somebody who is maybe less adept with energy practice, or perhaps somebody who knows very little about these functions, and speak to them on perhaps pragmatic applications of these transmuting practices and how to even get your feet wet in something like this?
Typically when I work with someone in this, I actually take them through certain exercises because honestly, trying to describe this just in words is very challenging. However, these exercises cause them to experience it directly, and that's what makes it click. It's one thing to hear about a beautiful place someone went and visited. It's a total another thing to see a picture of it or video, and it's even way more different when you're actually there, up in it. So, I'll describe the exercises a bit, at least the principles behind them, so that people can understand, hopefully, the fundamentals of the answer you're seeking here. The exercises involve being aware of the internal feelings, which is your direct connection to your subconscious, which is direct connection to the greater mind, the collective whole, and those energetic interplays that we're often taught not to pay attention to. By getting in the body, which all dimension and all, this is energetic instinct manifested, so all dimension and all energetic instinctive intelligence is wrapped in the body. It's already here. So by getting out of the head so much, or at least out of the mind space, which is kind of like a mirror, it's a partial reflection of what's being experienced, but it's not the experience itself. So it gets muddled up in its own perceptive limitations. By getting out of that and getting into the body and into the present moment feelings and allowing yourself to relearn that language and that instinct, you begin to become aware of those dynamics in play of energy, of the greater mind, of your mind, of sensing what's really happening within a person that you're interacting with, and what's happening within you, and where your actions and reactions are coming from, and are they based in fear, or are they based in love and presence. And so by doing this, you learn to, if you will, maneuver. Higher balance called it navigate. You learn to change your inner disposition to create the greatest love and presence, the greatest expansion, greatest vitality and uplifting for yourself and the others involved. You learn to open up your perception to these dynamics and flows. In and of that in and of that alone, it starts to change things. The subconscious mind and the greater mind begins to react. That in its own is a lengthy topic. Now let's give a quick example. Okay. Let's say you have a person that you're intimately connected with, and the relationship is getting rocky because some kind of fear has arisen. You become very addicted to each other, to the feelings that you had in the beginning. You know, when it's all fireworks and people have their own center, and so it's intriguing, it's interesting, it's got that magnetic appeal, right? You're gravitating towards one another. And then over time, you lose your center in each other and in the expectancy for those feelings. And as a result, fear of not having that starts to get in the way. And then it plays itself out in all these different manipulative and misperceptive communications and all these things that create this dissonance between the two. Now at this point, you have the option. What needs to happen is each person needs to find their own center, find their satisfaction and love within themselves, and then allow the relationship to do what it needs to do. Maybe it should continue in love. Maybe it's time for it to end. What needs to, however, you know when you practice this that whichever way it goes needs to be based in love. And that trying to force it to continue out of fear is only going to cause problems. And so you become aware inside yourself. You ask yourself, am I needing to be with this person because I'm afraid of not being with them? Because I feel like they have to be the source for some feeling I have that they're giving me. And can I learn to find that feeling within myself, even if they weren't around? And you begin to distill in yourself the truth of why you're being the way you are and why they're being the way they are. And then in complete honesty with the self and in understanding that that energy needs to be expressed, you communicate with that person the truth of what you're feeling and your current understanding about why you're feeling that way. And you begin to create this dynamic of just open, raw honesty. And you trust that because your intention is for your healing and the healing of the greater, of them as well, and for the highest good to come of it, that by expressing the truth, even if you feel it may end things, by expressing it and getting it out there, and allowing that dynamic to happen so that everything can be brought into the open, you know that ultimately it's going to lead to the best possible outcome. If you stay together, there will be a greater loving dynamic there than there ever was before. If you split up, you'll at least be able to remain friends because you were honest with each other. You were upfront. Now, if you allow fear to continue to control things, and it finally breaks apart, the relationship breaks apart, you probably won't be able to be friends. You probably won't ever want to see each other again. There's no need for that, but it's because everybody was in fear and they were angry and all muddled up in their crap. If you stay together, it's probably going to continue to be one of the most frustrating and difficult things you've ever done. And some people are addicted to misery, so whatever.
I want to shift gears a little bit. Speaking to say, your average American who sees more invasive legislation coming from the executive branch, more protests going on globally, more legislation going towards the contaminating of our food sources, more polluting of our air quality. Speaking to one who can't distill all of these seemingly separate problems down to one fundamental source, what would you say to somebody like that who says, what's going on in the world? What's happening? What am I missing? What's really happening in the world right now?
Well, and this is the thing, it all ties into everything
with
we've
the
been
understanding
talking
that
about.
obviously your answer is going to be coming through one perspective of that, but nonetheless.
People have lost. People have become so afraid of being real, honest, vulnerable. And I'm not talking about allowing themselves to be dominated. I'm talking about vulnerability in the sense of being really present in an experience, fully appreciating the truth of it, and trusting in the ability to evolve with it and flow through it together and as individuals. We become so afraid of experiencing, so afraid of people knowing who and what we are, so afraid of knowing who and what others are, that we have created these dynamics of defensiveness, these dynamics of security, these dynamics of, well, as long as I take care of me, then I'll have what I want, to heck with everyone else. Dog eat dog, strong rule the weak, which is a couple of biggest delusions ever. It's a special kind of insanity. And all of we've created this. And as a result, all these psychosis, all these psychological dysfunctions that have gone into creating the poisoning of the planet, into creating the odds that people have, these difficult dynamics between different people and different countries, and the politicians versus the citizens, and all of this, it's all wrapped up in this sense of separation and this sense of false security that we feel we need because we're afraid of being real. We have been raised for thousands of years to view even the most basic, fundamental, natural drives and desires that energy has to express itself through us as wrong. When it's not wrong, yes, we can become wiser in how we express it, but it simply is. It's beautiful. There are so many amazing ways we can express love with each other, and we have allowed fear to create unnatural restrictions and misunderstandings that have caused psychosis throughout the entire collective of humanity. We subject our kids to it from the very beginnings. There's no longer, there is this block on our sense of the ability to love and be loved, to love ourselves, just because. Not because we follow some base ideas, but because we are this amazing energy manifested. We're miraculous. We should love ourselves just because. And when you truly love yourself, from my experience, and from the experiences I've seen in many people, when you truly love yourself, you can't help but love others. You can't help but be compassionate with others. Yes, maybe you'll step up and do what you need to do to defend yourself and others if need be, but yet you'll do it from a place of presence and compassion, just enough to help deal with the situation, rather than spite and fear and it's a completely different dynamic. I'll give you an example. There's a friend of mine who, for a long time, this person and I, we walked on eggshells with each other. And that person was constantly finding reasons to be miserable, to twist everything into a negative, constantly throwing around negative vibrations, and it would hit me like a ton of bricks constantly. And I tried being nice, I tried pussyfooting around, and and all this to get them through it. I wasn't being fully real and raw and expressive. And as a result, it was building up constant tension. One day, when this person started going on their rant and even became aggressive towards me on an emotional level, I had enough. And I decided to practice what I had finally realized about the need to be just upfront and honest and let the energy out. In the beginning, it was shaky, like there was a lot of anger coming out, and it was, to me, righteous anger. At the same time, my intention was to do whatever needed to be done to bring healing to the situation. So as I let it out, I started to become very present, very stable. And even though I was right there, and every time they came at me, I was tearing apart their illusions, one right after another, there came a point when this person was yelling in my face and even violently shoved me. It did not faze me. I had no fear reactions, no anger, no spite, nothing. I was just like, boom, okay, still right there with you. And it completely dissolved away that buildup of defensiveness that they had. And one of the greatest healings I've ever seen took place from that situation. So when you do these things out of a trust and an honesty and a love and a desire for the greater whole, and you love yourself, and you're also putting out, because I was also willing to accept any truth they brought to me that I need to reflect on. That's a part of it. When you do that, the ability to deal with these situations where there's injustice, it comes from a different place. You're able to be fully present and create real change. These people that are causing all the problems in the world, they're reflections of things within us we need to deal with. And we can tear down all the dictators we want. We can play a never-ending war against tyranny. Until we change ourselves internally, it will be a never-ending war. There will always be 10 more dictators to rise up and take the place of the last one we took down. Because it's within us. It's within us. And it starts with being real, with being honest, with throwing out all the BS and all the rules and regulations. The only rules are love and respect. And the willingness to help evolve together. We're all in this together. We respect our personal lives, we respect those of others, and we also realize it's an interplay of a whole. And when you can come from that standpoint and be present in that, throwing out all the other extreme shoulds and should nots, and just grow together, learn together, help each other. When you can do that, this world will change. Truly change.
Wow, that's awesome. So I just want to close with presenting a scenario. If you were standing in front of a podium before all of humanity and had a minute and a half to speak your message, what would that be? What do the people really need to know in a morsel, in a nutshell? What really needs to be communicated here?
Be honest. Be honest with yourselves. Yeah, it's scary. We spent lifetimes learning to hide from ourselves and each other. We spend lifetimes learning to be shelled and walled off, and to look for safe ways to express things. Be honest with what you're feeling, and be honest with others about what you're feeling, even if it may not go the way some part of you thinks it should. That's probably an issue anyway. Throw that out. Let the energy run. Be honest and come at it from a standpoint of wanting for the greatest possible experience, and allow things to run. If you have someone that you have a deep, intimate crush on or whatever, just tell them. Just be open about it. And if it doesn't work out to where they're like, okay, yeah, I feel the same way, fine. At least you got it out there. You've relieved the pressure. You've gotten it out. And now you can move on to someone who will. And at least you were honest. And you never know what kind of beautiful friendship that can create. And you don't know how things may change in the future to where if you hadn't said that and suddenly they did have feelings, they may not have acted on it. Just be honest and allow them to be honest. Allow yourself to want to seek for greater truth, greater love, greater beauty, the best possible dynamics for you within yourself and for you with your environment, including other people. Whatever that is, don't attach to it. Whatever the best possible dynamics are, want for that, and be honest. Get yourself out there and be willing to work this out. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be exciting. It may be a little scary at times. You will learn to love it because it's who and what we really are. The heart of a child.
Thank you so much, man. The purpose of these videos are purely to share and express perspectives. So if you resonate and if you enjoy what you hear, please feel free to share. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.